Welcome back to Silicon Bytes. You have been warned. This is the strong reaction of Poland to the incursion by Russia of drones onto its territory. But that's not the only incursion. We are seeing, as unfortunately predicted, an escalation week by week. Soon it may even be day by day of the steps that Russia is willing to take to challenge NATO and the EU. A dangerous new line is being drawn in Europe's skies, not just over Ukraine, but over Poland, the Baltics, Scandinavia. Russia is weaponizing the civilian skies, just as it has sought to weaponize everything else: energy, food, raw materials, internet cables, and culture itself. Before we jump into this episode, thanks to everyone who supports the channel through Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, and especially those who have helped with our current fundraiser. We are trying to buy two 4x4 vehicles for the 93rd Brigade, and they have a desperate need for these vehicles. So please watch out for that placement later in the episode. And if you can help, do. It really does help to keep the Ukrainian army resilient. It also helps to save lives. If leaders and experts are surprised by the rapid escalation by Russia, hard on the heels of the drone incursion into Poland, then they've not been paying attention either to events or to Russia's strategic military doctrine. It's Moscow rules. The next step will also come as a shock to them as it unfolds very quickly and at scale. Drone swarms, fighter jets, shattered international norms, and warnings fired off in the corridors of the UN. What does it mean when airspace becomes a battleground? And what are Russia's aims through this extraordinary aggression? Well, let's start with Poland's dramatic warning at the US and on the ground. On 27th of September 2025, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski made headlines at an emergency UN Security Council meeting with a message addressed directly to Moscow. If another missile or aircraft enters our space without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it. You have been warned. That's reported in Euronews. Prime Minister Donald Tusk echoed this statement earlier the same day. We will take the decision to shoot down flying objects when they violate our territory and fly over Poland. There is absolutely no discussion about that. These remarks come after a steady drumbeat of airspace violations, whether it is Russian MiG-31 jets entering Estonian airspace for 12 whole minutes, or dozens of Russian drones crossing into Poland, as reported by Reuters. Poland has invoked NATO's Article 4. Indeed, Estonia did the same, the mechanism for consultations in the face of threats to a member's security. Sikorski characterized these violations not as incidental or navigational errors, but as part of what he calls an escalating hybrid war that Russia has been waging for years. He listed a litany of offences: murders of politicians, journalists, human rights defenders, cyber attacks against hospitals and financial institutions, arson, sabotage, attacks using postal packages containing incendiary devices, attacks on Ukrainian embassies, and the list goes on and on. That is reported in the Brussels Signal. Poland's tone marks a shift. Let's hope it's a shift of action and response, not just a shift of tone. Until recently, leadership often tried to attribute violations to airspace, to error, to drift, to miscommunication. Now the language admits both the frequency and intention of these violations. And of course, the finger of blame has been pointed at Moscow, which is, I have to say, entirely appropriate. What these comments don't yet do is point to the next stage, the escalation that is yet to come. The warnings, especially from Sikorski, carry moral weight. A democratic country saying it will defend itself, not merely protest with words. There is righteous anger in the messages that were delivered, and the moral stakes are high. Poland is saying it will no longer be a passive border state while its skies are trampled. This is not saber-rattling for show. It's about preserving sovereignty and preventing the normalization of violations. Poland is drawing a red line in the sky. It is pushing NATO to treat these incursions not as annoyances or diplomatic nuisances, but as threats demanding military, political, and legal responses. The West must now decide, will it hold those lines or allow erosion by toleration of them? Will it signal weakness to Moscow and thereby invite more incursions and on a truly disruptive scale? Well, let's now review the latest incursions that have taken place. This is drone incursions over Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The same week these warnings were issued, Northern Europe found itself under airspace stress. On the 22nd to 23rd of November, Copenhagen Airport in Denmark was forced to shut for about 4 hours after 2 to 3 large drones were spotted flying in its airspace. Flights were diverted, many delayed. About 20,000 passengers were affected. That's according to Reuters. Oslo Airport followed suit, closed for around 3 hours after drone sightings. Danish authorities say the drones appeared controlled by a capable operator, lights being turned on and off, approaching from multiple directions and manoeuvring deliberately. This is according to Reuters. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the Copenhagen incident the most serious attack on Danish critical infrastructure to date. That is, of course, in the context of Russia's full-scale war that began in 2022. That's reported in The Guardian. Norway's Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre noted that his country has observed several airspace violations over recent months. Russia, as usual, denied involvement, according to the Financial Times.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Sweden has also reported airspace violations or proximity alarms involving Russian aircraft. One of the Estonian MiG-31 incursions, for instance, was detected in relation to the Baltic Sea. Sweden's Air Force released a still image of a MiG-31 over the Baltic Sea after it had crossed out of Estonian airspace. That's reported in Reuters. The Scandinavia incidents show this is not just a Polish problem. The Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Baltic front is also in play. And the pattern is spreading. Expect it to spread further west and south. For my part, I expect a test of Berlin's resolve to be what's coming next, what this is leading to. The capable operator language is crucial. These are not random flyovers. These appear coordinated, designed to probe response, test defenses, achieve psychological disruption. Airports are civilian, public, and vulnerable. Shutting them down causes economic and reputational damage, and of course it feeds public anxiety. Strategically, these incursions test whether NATO's air policing, response readiness, intelligence sharing, and attribution mechanisms are sufficient. Also, they test the political will across the alliance to follow through when warnings turn to shooting these down out of the sky. These Scandinavian drone incursions should sharpen the urgency of European leaders. They highlight that the frontline defence isn't just Ukraine's problem, it is now Europe's problem as well. Perhaps it always was Europe's problem. As articulated in recent episodes, I believe that we need to develop a concept of combined security space in the air, covering Europe and Western and Central Ukraine at a minimum. Without a common security that explicitly combines Ukrainian and European skies, we make ourselves vulnerable to attack. Next, building the drone wall and Polish-Ukrainian cooperation in air defence. In the face of these escalating drone threats, the EU is pushing forward with a concept increasingly referred to as the drone wall, a layered defence system along its eastern flank. European Defence Commissioner Andreas Kubilius announced on 18th of September that he would convene talks with defence ministers to flesh out this plan. That's according to Reuters. The wall is to combine sensors, jamming systems, and weapons to detect and neutralize incoming UAVs. Some estimates suggest it could be up and running within about a year if the political, tactical, technical, and budgetary pieces fall into place, according to Reuters. Russia's actions, however, suggest that we don't have a year, and in fact, they will escalate while they still have the advantage before we are fully prepared to deal with it. Crucially, Ukraine is being brought into this project not just as beneficiary, but as a technology partner. Polish and Ukrainian forces have become joint working groups on UAVs, counter-drone warfare, joint training, sharing operational knowledge, integrating new systems, testing countermeasures. This is according to Evropska Pravda. Zelensky has urged similar joint air defense systems with Poland and Romania. Ukraine's been talking about this for a while. Suddenly, Europe has become very interested in it. Lithuania, which has already suffered multiple drone incursions, consistent violations of its airspace, has called for Ukraine's expertise to be fully utilized. That's from Reuters. Similarly, NATO's Operation Eastern Sentry is being expanded. RAF Typhoons from the UK are now flying air patrol missions over Poland, reinforcing its eastern flank after Poland suffered that serious drone incursion earlier this month. According to Reuters again, the drone wall as a structural response is long overdue. For too long, European air defense has lagged behind Russian drone tactics in adaptability. This wall could close some of the gaps: detection, tracking, coordination, response, and putting in place rules of engagement. Ukraine's inclusion is not just solidarity, it is a smart strategy. Ukraine has had 2+ years of hard-earned experience innovating with UAVs, counter-drone measures, asymmetric tactics. That expertise is absolute gold. Reinforcements of doctrine, tech, training, and morale, these are all things that we need Ukraine to contribute to with its unique experience. But building joint capability is easier said than done. There are challenges: funding, political unity. Some EU and NATO members are, of course, less keen to move at this pace and in this direction. There are differing threat perceptions, differing legal constraints as well. Airspace sovereignty, clarity on the rules to identify and shoot down projectiles. All of this is complex. Also, speed matters. If the implementation drags, then incidents will continue and they will scale in severity. Morally, this is a defense of democratic Europe's physical and normative borders, a growing recognition that sovereignty in 2025 is not just about the walls on land, but about who controls the skies, who is able to protect their civilians, defend their infrastructure, as well as vital energy and logistics routes. Europe is trying to transition from reactive outrage to proactive strategy. It is painful to watch that turnaround in real time. The drone wall project, Polish-Ukrainian joint training, Eastern Sentry, these are all signs that the West is beginning to treat drone incursions and airspace violations not as quirks of somebody else's war, but as critical security issues demanding investment and coordination by Europe itself. But why is Russia escalating these airspace threats? What's the strategy? What desperation is it driven by? And what is the influence of Russia's revisionist, revanchist imperial policies. Let's pause and ask why this surge in airspace violations, drone incursions, disruptions of airports, and provocative flyovers, what they are all for. What drives Russia to push these edges, especially as much of its conventional war effort is under pressure? Experts point to several overlapping causes. Firstly, the failure of their front lines. Russian conventional advances in Ukraine have got bogged down. Territorial gains are hard won. Supply lines are completely strained. The regime may be under pressure from the Z patriots, the ultra-nationalist quarter, as well as regime insiders. In this context, escalation elsewhere on multiple fronts, including hybrid and aerial provocations, serves to shift narratives, pressure adversaries, show strength. That strength, importantly, is being shown both externally and internally. Secondly, testing the limits of NATO, EU resolve, and their technical readiness. Incursions into Polish airspace, the MiG-31s through Estonian airspace, drones over Denmark and Scandinavia are all signals. Can the alliance detect, attribute, scramble, and respond? Do rules of engagement exist? What is the cost of deterrence, and how does it play with their domestic electorates? Thirdly, hybrid warfare and information warfare. Some incursion incidents serve a dual purpose: physical disruption and, of course, propaganda. Denials muddy the attribution, increase public anxiety, all play into a strategy of sowing fear, undermining trust, elevating Russia's negotiating leverage, while keeping below thresholds that trigger full military escalation, or at least that may well be the Russian calculation. It can also use this to destabilize countries, their internal politics, especially those that are heading for elections. It makes it easier for Russia to inject the argument, why are you suffering for Ukraine when you could surrender this and all of this pain would stop? It's a form of kinetic blackmail, in fact, and we should certainly not give in to it. Fourthly, imperial revanchism and symbolic reclaiming. The more Russia can act as though borders, airspace, influence zones are fluid and can be breached at will, it normalizes a view that its empire can be rebuilt, that spheres of influence can be re-established. This is dangerous because norms once broken are hard to restore. And there is strategic risk for Russia too. Every incursion invites confrontation. If a jet is shot down, if a civilian is harmed, if NATO or the EU retaliate, this could escalate beyond Russia's control, beyond its intention even. Russia denies, obfuscates, but the pattern is increasingly obvious, and no one is buying the line that Russia is not behind it. On the Western side, the responses are still uneven. Some countries are bold, Poland, Lithuania, for instance, others more cautious. Disunity could be exploited by Russia, whose strategy thrives on ambiguity. We are in the game of thresholds. How far can Russia push before others act, and will their reaction be consistent? The escalation of air threats over Europe is not random. It is strategic, both as a reflection of Russia's weaknesses and as a tool to muddy the waters, force a draining of our resources, test the strength of our alliances. Russia may be hoping that Europe stockpiles weapons rather than delivering them to Ukraine. If Europe allows these to continue unchallenged, these violations and provocations, then the precedent becomes far more costly than any individual incident. Well, the experts are, of course, debating what Russia's strategic goals may be, what Russia's true intentions are, and how Europe must react. Among the analysts, there's some debate about what the core Russian goals are in the airspace provocations and how Europe should respond. Let's take a few examples. Some argue that Russia is aiming to divide NATO, tempt some allies to caution, others to escalate, watch the reactions and exploit the hesitant ones. If some states refuse to shoot down drones or experience political backlash, Russia may hope to weaken the alliance's cohesion. It may hope, in fact, that the alliance is incapable of uniting on this issue, and in that sense, it could show NATO to be technically redundant. Others see it as a force multiplier. These drones are cheap to deploy, relatively cheap to operate. Drones cost little compared to jets or missiles, but they tie up air defense systems. They require patrols, increased vigilance. They raise readiness costs. They drive up fatigue and possibly induce public unease. Experts warn Russia is testing not just hardware, but the rules of what is permissible. Can an incursion be ignored? What is acceptable collateral damage? What diplomatic templates exist to blame and point the finger? And what are the legal precedents for trying to hold Russia to account? And ultimately, the question is going to be, beyond defense, beyond shooting these down, what can European countries do by way of maybe not just deterrence, but offensive action? And indeed, would they even contemplate that? Well, let's end with a quote from Mark Galeotti, one of the foremost Russian analysts. We have to interpret this as a probe and a warning, he said. And further, he clarified this is designed to assess Western reactions and test their capability to respond. Whichever way we choose to respond, the aggression by Russia will not end here. It will continue to adapt and probe the limits of our strength.